All right, so I want to talk about something that's a little controversial, but it is the season. It is the time of year to talk about this particular subject. So I'm just gonna get on with it and say it outright. Jason Voorhees did not drown as a boy at Camp Crystal Lake. That's not the story those movies tell. And everyone seems to think that that is the story that they told, but I just keep going, did you guys not watch those movies? Or maybe some people just don't understand how storytelling works. Like, I don't mean to talk down to you, but there's a literary tool called exposition, okay? And, like, I know some of you know this, but not everybody does. So, for those not in the know, when I talk about exposition, what I'm talking about is something that the writers use on a TV show or a movie or whatever, where they have a character explain something to another character. And yeah, it is so that that other character now knows so that the plot can move forward because they needed to know that. But more importantly, it is the writers explaining to you, the audience, what the heck is going on. Like in if you ever watched Buffy the Vampire Slayer series, if Giles would take a book, blow the dust off a dusty old book from his forbidden library and creak it open and be like, "All right, well, I've discovered, Buffy, that I think what you're facing from your description is a blah blah blah," and he will deliver all this exposition about the monster that the monster of the week that Buffy's fighting, and explain to us, the audience, because they didn't have time to explain it to us in a more dramatic fashion. So they just had him, say, "Buffy, this is a very, very dangerous. It's very dangerous. I want to be careful. Don't go. You should have backup. Maybe bring Angel with you because this thing's very dangerous. Because here's what it's capable of. Here's why we should be scared of it. Here's why it's a threat to the characters that we know and love. Here's all the stuff that we, the audience, need to understand in order to understand what happens next." They deliver it to us in the form of exposition. Giles was just a frigging exposition machine on that show. And I bring this up because in Friday the 13th, Part 2, which is the first movie that features Jason as a murderer, right? Like, they deliver what to me is just like, I won't hear otherwise. It is clearly exposition in the form of a spooky campfire story that is told by the camp director to the camp counselors before the camp officially opens. This new camp that happens to be really close to the old Camp Crystal Lake where Jason presumably drowned. And this tale that he tells is about how Jason doesn't drown, and how the local legend that Jason is like this local legend that he's like Bigfoot, that there's been like Jason sightings over the years a number of times, and that everyone says that he didn't really drown that day, and that his body was never found. That they just presumed he drowned because, well, gosh, he's gone. What else would have happened? But like they couldn't actually confirm it. They didn't find the body, and the story that is being told to the characters, it's a spooky story and it's supposed to set a mood, but it's also supposed to explain to us, the audience, what the heck is happening. And what the heck is happening is Jason is alive. That's what they explain to us. He didn't drown. They say he's been living in the woods like a feral child, like an animal. He's been eating animals that he hunts and kills, or just nuts and berries and leaves and shit, whatever he can find to shove in his mouth, grubs, insects, whatever. He's just been living out there in those woods all these years, and by now he would be a grown adult. He explains. this crazy old hermit living in the woods, driven psychotic by the fact that he was, born with some sort of intellectual disability apparently to begin with, but also experienced all this trauma because of his appearance, because he had some kind of a condition that made him look the way he looked, and was bullied and mistreated, and then presumably saw his mother murdered, and that was the whole thing. And so we have this very unhinged, being in the woods, and it's a very problematic trope. It's like clearly this trope of like a person with disabilities, mental and or physical, that is now a monster because of that. And like, it's problematic. But, that's the story. That's what they're telling you. That this deranged psycho killer's in the woods, and he didn't really die. He was been living in the woods by himself. My interpretation is that he was mistreated so much so that and because his brain didn't work like a typical person's brain works, that he just kind of really internalized this notion that like, well, I'm just like a horrible, gross monster. It's not safe for me to come out like where the people are anymore. I should just stay out here in the woods where it's like safe, where no one sees me. And that's why it's like the Bigfoot sighting, is because occasionally they see him, but he's always like, oh, he's trying to hide. Maybe he steals the clothes off somebody's clothesline because he needs some clothes, or steals a bit of food because pickings were scarce that week, or and he got desperate, or maybe he steals some tools or whatever to hobble together his little shack that he has in the woods, which is never really clear if he made that shack himself, hobbled together out of pieces of other falling apart camp cabins, or if, in fact, I would say more likely it was a camp cabin that was falling apart, and he's just kind of patched it together to stop it from falling apart completely with other bits of stuff that he scavenges. I mean, there's a toilet in the thing. Anyway, the point is, they tell us very clearly that he's still alive. They tell us around the campfire, and then they talk about it more when the final girl, whatever her name is, the main character, is in the bar with her friends, and she's going like, man, just I can't stop thinking about Jason after he told us about that. What would he be like now? Living in the woods, just a scared little boy in a grown man's body, a deranged psychopath, they're just really hitting us over the head with this notion that Jason has been alive all this time, and he's just a madman in the woods. A dangerous madman, capable of things that normal humans might not be capable of, but he's not a superhuman monster. He's just a crazed madman. That's the story that they tell us. That's the story that they wrote, that they intended, is that he didn't die. It's really clear. And frankly, the fact that he did have that shack in the woods doesn't make it feel like he's a mythical undead beast. It makes it feel like, nah, he's a man. He needed shelter, and he, made sure he had shelter. There's a toilet in the shelter. I mean, there's lots of movies that have people that don't stay dead because they're zombies or they're vampires or whatever. But most undead beings in most types of lore do not continue aging after they're dead. Jason appears to have done that. He is the age in Friday the 13th 2 that he presumably would be had he not drowned. And also, another thing these undead beings usually don't do, presumably, I guess we don't really know, but I don't presume that most of them poop. With the exception of vampires, I don't really think of them as like eating and pooping and having like a digestive system, you know what I mean? They're just there. Honestly, now, and that's got me thinking about vampires. Do vampires poop? And if so, it must be, just liquid. Like, do they poop blood? Anyway, I mean, they're on a liquid diet, I mean, it depends, vampires and Buffy sometimes eat regular food. Spike's been known to crunch up some Weetabix into his blood, give it a bit of texture. Anyway, I digress. The point is, nothing is really presented to us that strongly contradicts the idea that Jason is a living person for the first few movies. And every time we see him, he looks like a living person. He doesn't look like he's rotten or undead or anything. He just looks like a guy who was born with, looking the way he looks. But like, he looks like he's alive, and he acts like a living person. I mean, in part 2, I remember she's coming at him with the chainsaw, and he's like, ugh! Like, he's very frightened of that chainsaw. I think he gets subdued a few times and knocked out once or twice, like a person. He doesn't really start acting like an undead killing machine until after Corey Feldman's character has hacked him into pieces. And then in the subsequent movie, the adult version of Corey Feldman's character digs up the corpse, stabs that metal pole into him, lightning strikes him, and now, they just decided to go super campy and have it be like, yeah, lightning struck the body, and it's like Frankenstein's monster. He gets out of the grave, and now he's undead. This is a very different Jason than the alive Jason that we saw for the first few movies. This is the dead Jason. This is the Jason that can take 8 gunshots to the chest and 3 seconds later sit back up and keep coming after you. Living Jason didn't do that. He did absorb some punishment that really stretched our suspension of disbelief in terms of what a person could withstand. I'll grant you that. But not like that. We were still supposed to presume he was a guy. He didn't die until Corey Feldman killed him. That's the way it is. So, if you want to convince me otherwise, you better have a very compelling argument indeed.